I can tell you that I did speak with a few people, but there were messages upon messages online pouring out of love and memories and thank you.
Something strange happens when a city loses one of its own. The streets don't change, the restaurants still open, the music still plays, but somehow, everything feels different. In Detroit, one name used to carry a certain warmth wherever it was spoken: Mike B. For years, people walked into his restaurants not just for food, but for the feeling of belonging he created. Then one early Saturday morning, before the sun even had a chance to rise, that story took a devastating turn. A burst of gunfire outside a West Side bar ended the life of a man many considered the heart of their community. But what really happened that night? And why does the silence around it feel so heavy? The first thing you need to understand about Michael Brown, better known across Detroit as Mike B., is that the title restaurant owner barely scratches the surface of who he really was. In a city that has fought through decades of economic struggle, where opening a small business is already a battle, and keeping it alive is an even bigger one, Mike B. managed to build something that people genuinely cared about. His restaurants, Sloppy Chops and Sloppy Crab, weren't just places where people stopped by to grab a meal, they became gathering spots. The kind of places where birthdays were celebrated, where friends linked up after long work weeks, where families could walk in knowing they would be welcomed like regulars, even if it was their first time there. Walk into Sloppy Chops on any given night, and you would feel the energy instantly. The smell of food coming off the grill, the laughter bouncing around the room, the kind of warm chaos that only happens in places where people actually enjoy being together. Lamb chops sizzling in the kitchen, mac and cheese loaded with flavor, steak bites disappearing from plates almost as fast as they arrived. But if you talk to the people who kept coming back, they'll tell you something interesting. It wasn't just the food that made that place special. It was Mike B. himself. He was the kind of person who didn't hide behind an office door while the business ran itself. He was present, walking through the restaurant, checking on guests, cracking jokes, greeting people like they were old friends. Even if someone had only met him once before, he had a way of making them feel remembered. That kind of presence is rare in the hospitality world. And in Detroit, people notice when someone is genuine. Community members describe him the same way again and again: approachable, generous, and deeply invested in the city he came from. This wasn't someone who built a successful business and then distanced himself from the neighborhood that helped raise him. If anything, success made him double down on giving back. People talk about how he showed up when organizations needed help feeding families, how he made sure young people around him never went without a meal. In a city where food insecurity still touches thousands of households, that kind of commitment matters more than outsiders might realize. One community member put it simply: you couldn't be hungry around Mike B. That wasn't just a nice phrase people started repeating after he died. It was something people saw with their own eyes over the years. If someone needed help, he stepped up. No speeches, no publicity campaigns, just action. And that reputation spread far beyond his restaurants. Over time, Sloppy Chops became more than a place to eat. It turned into a hub for events, entertainment, and local culture. Comedy nights, karaoke, community celebrations. People knew that if something was happening there, it was going to be a good time. Local comedians performed there. DJs packed the room with music. Friends gathered for nights that stretched long past midnight, filled with laughter and the kind of memories people carry with them for years. Mike B. had built something that many business owners only dream of creating: a space where people didn't just show up for a product. They showed up for the atmosphere, the energy, the connection. But building something meaningful in a city like Detroit isn't easy. Every small business owner in the hospitality industry knows that the margins are tight and the pressure never really goes away. And when the pandemic hit, that pressure multiplied overnight. Restaurants across the country were collapsing under the weight of shutdowns, restrictions, and disappearing customers. Many never reopened. Mike B. fought through that storm the same way he approached everything else: with persistence. Keeping the doors open during that time meant making constant adjustments, finding ways to keep staff employed, and making sure the business survived week to week. Every table mattered. Every order mattered. Because when you run a restaurant, especially during a crisis, one bad night can hit harder than most people realize. And one night during that difficult stretch proved exactly how tough things had become. A group of customers walked into Sloppy Chops like any other guests. They sat down, ordered their meals, and by all accounts had a great time. Plates were cleared, drinks were finished. The experience looked completely normal, until it was time to pay. Instead of settling the bill, the group suddenly got up and sprinted for the door. Employees saw it happening in real time. The surveillance cameras captured everything: the rush toward the exit, the quick dash into the parking lot, the vehicles pulling away into the night. The bill they left behind was $340. Now, to someone who has never run a restaurant, that might sound like an inconvenience. But during the middle of a pandemic, when every dollar mattered, that loss hit hard. Mike B. later explained that the unpaid bill represented a significant portion of the day's revenue. But what stood out most about the situation wasn't the loss. It was how he responded to it. He didn't explode in anger. He didn't start making threats online. Instead, when he spoke publicly about what happened, the word he used was simple: disappointing. He said it was disappointing that people still chose to do childish things like that. That response tells you a lot about who he was as a person. Even when people took advantage of him, his instinct wasn't rage, it was reflection. But he also understood something important. If he wanted to protect what he had built, he needed to be proactive. So he made a decision. The restaurant would start hiring security, not because he wanted confrontation, but because he wanted to make sure the staff and the business were protected moving forward. It was a practical solution, the kind that came from someone who understood how quickly things can go wrong in the hospitality world. And that detail, his awareness of security, his instinct to protect the people around him, would take on an eerie significance later. Because on the night that truly mattered, when everything changed forever, there would be no security standing between Mike B. and what was about to happen. The night that changed everything started like countless other nights in Detroit. It was early Saturday morning on the west side of the city, the kind of late-night atmosphere Detroit has always been known for. Music in the background, people laughing, conversations blending together, the familiar energy of a city that doesn't completely sleep when the clock passes midnight. Mike B. was exactly where you would expect him to be, around people. Around the community he had spent decades building relationships with. For someone in the hospitality world, nights like this weren't unusual. They were part of life. Inside the bar, everything felt normal. People were enjoying themselves, moving around, talking, unwinding after a long week. Nothing about the scene suggested that within minutes, the entire mood of that night would shift into something tragic. By around 4:30 in the morning, the night was starting to wind down. This is the moment when bars slowly empty out. Some people step outside waiting for rides. Others gather on the sidewalk, finishing conversations before heading home. The energy softens as the night begins to close, and then, in a split second, everything changed. Gunfire. Multiple shots ripped through the quiet early morning air outside the bar near Fenkel and Schaefer. The sound instantly shattered the calm of the street. Conversations stopped. Panic replaced the relaxed rhythm of people leaving the venue. People ran. Some ducked for cover. Others froze in confusion. The kind of chaos that follows gunfire is hard to describe unless you've witnessed it. Shouting, movement in every direction, people trying to figure out what just happened while also trying to get to safety. When the noise stopped, 3 people had been hit. Emergency responders rushed to the scene as Detroit police secured the area. Yellow tape quickly surrounded a place that only minutes earlier had been just another gathering spot at the end of a long night. 2 of the victims would survive. Mike B. would not. In the span of a few seconds, Detroit lost someone who had spent years building spaces where people felt welcome, fed, and cared for. A father, a husband, a businessman who had created opportunities for others and invested deeply into the community that raised him. And the shock of that loss spread quickly. Tributes flooded social media almost immediately. Friends, customers, and community members began sharing memories, stories about the meals they had at his restaurants, the conversations they had with him, the help he offered people when they needed it most. Over and over again, the same word kept appearing in those messages: real. People described him as someone who genuinely loved Detroit and the people in it. Someone who made others feel seen and valued the moment they walked into his world. That kind of authenticity is rare, and when a community loses someone like that, the grief spreads far beyond family and close friends. But grief wasn't the only thing spreading. Questions were spreading too. Detroit police began their investigation immediately. Detectives interviewed witnesses, collected evidence from the scene, and reviewed surveillance footage from nearby businesses. The normal steps of a homicide investigation moved forward. Yet days passed with no arrests, no suspect publicly identified, just the familiar statement that the investigation remained ongoing. For many people in Detroit, that silence has only deepened the mystery surrounding what happened that morning. Because Mike B. wasn't an unknown figure whose death could quietly disappear from public attention. He was someone people knew, someone people respected, someone the city is still mourning. And somewhere out there, someone knows exactly what happened on that sidewalk. If you've made it this far in the story, I want to hear your thoughts. Do you think this was a random act of violence? Or do you believe there's more to the story that hasn't been revealed yet? Let me know what you think in the comments below. And if you want to stay updated as new developments come out in this case and others like it, make sure you like the video, share it with someone who cares about stories like this, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next update.